Hi everyone, Jay here. This is going to be the first video, hopefully in a series of videos I'm going to call Lightsabers 101. This is some videos I've been wanting to do for a little while. The idea around them is if you're somebody who might be new to the community or just interested in custom lightsabers in general, and you'd like some education around some of the terminology, some of the parts that get used, how things are built, what things look like, maybe some of what's a realistic expectation, what might be an unrealistic expectation, and especially around the idea of what things might cost. So to dive right in, there are three types of lightsabers that you can purchase, at least custom lightsabers. There are what are called static lightsabers, and these are meant to be really just truly display pieces that sit on a shelf. They don't light up, they don't have any sounds. Oftentimes, these are meant to be really accurate replicas of props that were actually used in the movies. Not always, but more often than not. To show you one example of that, this is a static lightsaber. This is what is called a Graflex, specifically the one that is found in the very first Star Wars film, A New Hope. This is the lightsaber that Obi-Wan Kenobi hands to Luke Skywalker. This is, again, meant to be just a faithful reproduction of the prop that was actually used on screen. So while it looks every bit the part of a lightsaber as it should, it's not going to do anything except sit there and look pretty. Moving up, so to speak, on the food chain a little bit, is we come to what's commonly called a stunt lightsaber. And this is going to be a saber that basically just lights up. And the reason why we call them a stunt is because more often than not, these things get used for just exactly what you think they would, for stunts. You might see these being used for choreography. You might see these being used for actually live dueling, things like TSL, Ludo Sport, or just out in the backyard, just beating around some lightsabers with your buddies. These can be installed into just about any hilt that's installable. Really, they're just kind of a flashlight inside of a lightsaber hilt. Again, they look the part. They can be very nice. There's a minimum of electronics in here. Really just a battery, a switch, and an LED sitting up in the emitter. And you hit the button, it latches. It's called a latching switch, which means when you push it down, it holds. As you can see, it lights up, so I can smack this guy around. He's not going to turn off. If I beat it with a blade, I'm not going to risk ruining any delicate electronics in there. The next stage is what we call a fully installed lightsaber, or oftentimes just gets called an installed lightsaber. And this is going to be something that has lights and sounds, and there can be extra stuff on top of that. That's kind of where things start. So to pull off another Graflex here, this is one from The Force Awakens. The Force is strong in my family. So I've just woken this one up from what's called deep sleep. The soundboard that's in here has this feature in it, and we'll go over that in a little bit here. But turning it on, obviously you can hear some sounds. It lights up, does some stuff. Swing it around, you can hear it makes different sounds. And those are the basic features of an installed lightsaber. Basically, sound and lights and some level of motion sensitivity and motion activation around some of the lighting and sound effects that you see. All of these sabers have can have different external components on them that sometimes might be a little confusing when you're new to the custom lightsaber community or just kind of lightsaber movie props in general, and you hear some of the terminology that's being brought about. One of the first ones is greeblies. So greeblies was a term coined, I believe it was actually coined by George Lucas when he was doing the movies, and basically what that refers to as any little gadget or doodad that gets stuck on something that kind of enhances the look, gives it more of a mechanical look or something, or changes it. I really feel like the Graflex is a wonderful example of greeblies because this thing basically comes this way, but it gives it kind of an authentic look. This would be this little red, what's called a red button up here, would be considered a greebly. The bunny ears, you've got the connector pins down here, glass eye. These are all sort of greeblies. But even something like just a little screw can be considered a greebly, or this one has a little, I don't know if you can see it there, but like a little red crystal in it, just to kind of add an accent. So when you hear the term greebly, that usually means some little piece that's been fitted on a lightsaber to, give it a certain look, some kind of, whether it's authentic or to, make it look like, hey, maybe if you push this, it does this thing or something. Another piece is a control box. So some lightsabers don't have just a, kind of like this stunt lightsaber I showed you, where, you've got an obvious switch there. Some lightsabers have either a functional or non-functional control box. And again, this was something that was developed as part of the props in the actual movies. And so this is a Luke Skywalker's Return of the Jedi, hero lightsaber that predominantly features this control box up here. To further elaborate on some of the other components that you could have in a lightsaber, you'll hear the term sometimes crystal reveal. Usually what that refers to is a lightsaber that can open up at some point and can display or reveal the internal components. Usually that is going to be what is called the kyber crystal, the actual crystal that sort of makes the lightsaber work. And this is an example of that. So as you saw me do there, this lightsaber closes back up, but then opens up to reveal the crystal inside. And in some cases, the crystal reveal can be as simple as just unscrewing one part of the lightsaber. And here, I'll show you an example of that on this Graphics here. This is an example of both a crystal reveal and more commonly it's called a crystal chassis. So you can see the tail end of this guy, where you can see the chassis, there's a crystal in here. And so we would call this a crystal reveal because I can pull the back end off, but more accurately this would just be a crystal chassis. To kind of cover some of the components that go into making up one of these lightsabers, we'll start at the top and we'll work our way down. So the thing that makes the light, we just generally call an LED, and that's exactly what they are. They are LEDs, but they're usually made up of more than one actual little small LED, and I'll show you an example here. This is what's called a tri-Cree, because it is actually using a type of LED made by a company called Cree, but more accurately, this type of LED is called a tri-star. It is because it has 3 LEDs sitting on this one copper PCB. And the reason for the 3 is because we can do color mixing with them, and it's also, frankly, from a benefit around how much power is going into it versus light output and heat. They kind of hit that perfect point around not generating more heat than you'd want, not sucking up more power than you want, but still being able to put out a really bright light. A less common one, but one that is used by one manufacturer, is a quad LED. And as you can see, there are 4 LEDs bunched up in the center there. There's some erroneous claims around quad LEDs, specifically ones that are designed like this, that they have they're brighter, and that's not the case. In all actuality, as you can see, the LEDs that are on here are roughly half the size of the ones that are on this TriStar. They are clustered together in the middle, which creates a bit of a problem when it comes to heat. Because if you light up 2 or 3 of these guys, they actually do put out quite a bit of heat. And with it being centered here, you can really run into the problem of this thing gets really hot really quick. And if you don't have a good heat sink, you can run into problems where the LED can potentially fry, or you're just not going to get the level of light output that you might desire. So that is the actual LED itself, but what we also sometimes call the LED is the actual housing, and this is an example. Sometimes it gets called the heat sink as well, which is a little bit erroneous. The heat sink is actually this, usually it's copper, but this base plate here, but this is a full housing where you can see the lens here. There's LED sitting in there on top of this copper heat sink there, and then is, again, held together by this aluminum housing that goes around it. This is one of those quad Crees. This comes from a company called Saberforge. An example of a tricree is this guy here. You can see on this, we've actually got 3 independent lenses which are focusing each one of the LEDs independently rather than a single lens trying to focus 4 smaller LEDs kind of clumped together. So this is a more efficient light output than a quad LED like that. But again, you can see the housing is more or less identical or similar. There's our heat sink in there, the housing, and the lens sitting up top. The next thing that makes the Saber work is going to be the switch. And there's a lot of different kinds of switches out there, so I'm not really going to go over them too much. But basically, a Saber is going to have anywhere from 1 or more switches, usually 1 or 2. And the most basic Sabers are going to have 1. You hit the switch, the Saber turns on. And maybe if it has a single auxiliary effect, you hit that button again. It might do something like make a blaster sound and light up, or make it look like it's clashing against another Saber. Some Sabers that have more than 1 switch, usually 2 switches, that second switch might do some auxiliary type effects where you can push that and it'll do like blaster lockups or play certain sounds, things like that. It just kind of depends on the soundboard that goes into the lightsaber and how it's configured and programmed. Moving on down the chain, we get to the actual soundboard itself. This is the brains, this is the meat of what actually makes the Saber work. So what is a soundboard? Well, it's a little electronic device. And this is a Nano Biscotti V3. This is one of the smaller soundboards on the market. This is a little older too. There's a newer version out. But just to give you some idea around what a soundboard is, it is exactly, this is a little circuit board, and we have on most soundboards you're going to have a little SD card here which comes out, and this actually holds all the config files and what are called sound fonts of the various things that all the sounds and effects that you hear when you turn the lightsaber on are usually stored on this. There are 2 big, I'll say mature sort of manufacturers or providers of soundboards, and those are Plector Labs. You usually see the abbreviation PL for them, or you may also hear them referred to as the Buttered Toast. It's a moniker that goes back to the early days of when they were being set up, and most of their soundboards actually come with the little Buttered Toast emblem on them there. The next mature soundboard would be Nigon Electronic Creations. You'll see that abbreviated as NEC. Nigon's boards are all red, so they're very easy to distinguish from a Plector Lab board. And he has, all of his boards are the exact same size, which is actually a pretty nice feature. Both manufacturers have different tiers of soundboards. So you have entry-level, sort of mid-level, and you can have high-end. I unfortunately don't have an open NEC board on me, but I'm going to show you some different levels of some soundboards for Plector Labs. So again, this is the raw soundboard, Nano Biscotti V3, but I'll show you what's kind of currently on the market now, the current updated. I'm going to leave them in the static bags though, so I don't want to accidentally do a static discharge on them. So this is a Nano Biscotti V4. I'll give you an idea on the size. It's the exact same size as the V3. It's just been updated. Does a few more things, holds some more sound banks, has a few more features to it. This is basically their entry-level board. They do have a board below this called a Pico Crumble that does not feature a SD card on it. This is their most basic board. It's about $10 or $15 cheaper, I think, than the Nano Biscotti. But it's also about the same size. It's just slightly smaller, and unfortunately I don't have one of those in my stock. The next size up is going to be their mid-grade board. And this is called a Prism. This is the Prism 5.1. These used to be much larger. Back in the 4 series and even the 5.0, they were probably about 50% larger than this. I do have a Saber with one installed, but I won't open that up because it's not really relevant here. But so this is the mid-grade board. This is a fantastic, wonderful board. It fits in just about any hilt out there. You can actually fit this in a hilt that has a very thin inner diameter, which is nice. You can get a really full featured board now since these came out into some of the smaller, thinner hilts. And then moving up to their flagship, which is the Crystal Focus. This is a much larger board. There's actually also a satellite board that can go with this called a color extender, or CEX. You'll see abbreviated CEX. That basically will be soldered onto this with some wiring that allows for some extra current regulation for multiple channels. I'm not going to go too deep into the capabilities around these soundboards. That'll be for another video, but just to give you an idea of what a soundboard is, the different sizes, and again, obviously, these step up in cost. So Nano Biscotti is around $70 and $68. You factor in some shipping there. Prism is like $115, and a Crystal Focus is about $150. That doesn't include the Kex. The Kex I think is another $60 or $62. So again, you can kind of see how those escalate. For the NEC boards, I believe it's also $68 or about $70 for the for this what's called the Spark 2, which is their entry-level board. The Spark Color 2, which is their mid-grade, I think is right now about $100. And Igniter 3, which is Nigon's flagship, is I know he lowered the price recently. I think those are going for $130 now. So again, just like the Plector boards, you can see they step up. There are other boards out there. I'm going to refer to most of those as being not mature boards, and that means some of them are fairly new. So there might be some quirks here and there. A couple of popular ones right now is the Teensy Saber, which is actually based off of an open source board. It's got some really cool features to it, and there's a lot of development going on. Excuse me, a lot of development going on with it right now, so it's not completely mature. There's another board out there that's picking up some popularity called the Cerebus, which is a board that comes out of Russia from War Sabers. And again, there's also still some development associated with that. Moving on down, we'll get to the power supply. So this is the most common battery that gets put into a custom lightsaber, and this is an 18650 lithium-ion battery. I'll take it out of here so you can just get an idea on the size. I think some people have a misconception when they see these, like, oh, this looks like a AA battery. I mean, this thing is, quite a bit larger than a AA battery. The numbers on here actually refer to the size in millimeters. So it's 18 millimeters thick by 65 millimeters long. So again, this is the most common battery that gets used. And then to provide the sounds, we have a speaker. They come in different sizes. The smallest ones are 20 millimeter, and then you can get up to I think highest I think I've seen in sabers is about 32 millimeter. 28 millimeter is the most common, with 24 and 20 millimeter probably being the next two. And to give you an idea of what the insides of a lightsaber might look like, this is a test bed chassis that I have, just kind of rudimentarily wired up, but just to give you an idea of what the inside of a saber kind of looks like without having the saber wrapped around it. So we've got our power supply here, battery, our soundboard. I've got some wires where you would run a switch to, and a speaker at the end there. And then there's also what's called a recharge port. And this is what allows you to charge the battery without having to take it out. And this is a Switchcraft one. This is what they look like outside of the saber. And again, this gets wired up and you plug it in to charge the saber up. So all of these things said, hopefully it's been a little bit informative. We're going to have another video in the series here that will kind of elaborate on some of this stuff more. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the soundboard capabilities, crystal chassis in general, and some of the capabilities that you can get out of a lightsaber, and some of the things that are realistic and unrealistic. So this has been video one. Hopefully you've gotten some information out of it that's been helpful, and hopefully I'll get video number 2 done here soon, and so we can keep continuing the learning. Thanks guys, bye.